If you're lacking luster around your business, but you've always loved your business and you're like, why am I feeling overtaken by it or maybe burned out or just like unsteady in your step? That could be a reason that you should consider implementing some boundaries, even if you don't necessarily tangibly feel, oh, I need to set boundaries or there's something wrong with my scheduling, because those can eat away at you different things.
Welcome to the Process to Profit podcast, where we find out about the key processes and productivity techniques that drive successful service-based businesses. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale, join us as we uncover practical strategies to streamline your operations and help you make more money by boosting your profitability. Let's get started. My guest today is Katie Murray. Katie is a multifaceted professional, a business owner, entrepreneur, executive of human resources at a private hospitality organization, mother, and wife. She supports 500 team members and 50 plus managers and supervisors, growing the HR department as the organization's nucleus. Katie's photography has been featured in over 30 publications, earning multiple awards. I saw some of your posts on Threads this week of your pictures, and I was drooling. As co-founder of Katie & Co. VA, she helps businesses grow and succeed. Katie has been a guest speaker at universities and on high-ranking podcasts. She hosts the Ginger Biz podcast, sharing business success and leadership tips. Katie is described as a fun-loving business guru, passionate about sharing her expertise. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Lauren, I am excited to be here. The energy that you bring just gets me vamped up. I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, it's Monday morning. We are ready to go and talk all about business. So I know I read your bio, but give us the more Katie version. Tell us a little bit more about who you are, who you help, all of those good things.
Yeah, absolutely, Lauren. And again, thank you for having me on. So, I started out as an entrepreneur over a decade ago when I decided that I was going to make photography into a business. And with that, I was doing a cross country road trip. I snapped some cool photos actually at like Yellowstone and whatnot. And then what I did is I printed those and gifted them to friends and family for holiday. And actually, kind of funny, just a couple weeks ago, I went back to Yellowstone, got to see the same things. And was visiting family on that trip and saw some of my old photos on their walls, and I was like, "That's so funny because those are hideous," but they were good at the time, so whatever. But then I realized after basically a decade that I love business more than I just love photography. Photography is more like a passion project, if you will, but the business is where it's at for me. I just love systems and processes and the analyticals of it all. And so that's what brought me to kind of doing Katie and Co. and the podcast and sharing all that information that I'm learning along the way. And about 5 years ago, I joined my current organization. So I am the head of human resources and supporting all the team members. So if that's a lot to take in, basically the way that I think about it is a triangle and each one is a point. So my human resource hat is a point, my Ginger Biz is a point, and my business, Katie & Co. and photography are a point. And in the center, it's helping others grow professionally. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
You in a triangle.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. A pointy nutshell.
Yes. So you have a lot of hats that you're wearing. You have a lot of things that you're doing. How do you set boundaries between sort of your corporate world and your professional world and your all of your different professional entrepreneur things that you're doing? How do you sort of keep those worlds apart and set back? Or do you? Maybe they overlap and some places there are boundaries and some places aren't. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, great question. Small story. One time when my daughter was young and I was in kind of the postpartum stage, I had a client who we need to reschedule due to rain. And I had told her, I was like, I can reschedule for tomorrow, but I don't have childcare. So there's that weird little tick in it. And she was like, oh, it's totally fine. My mom actually works with human development and children and is within that age range. So she'll come along. So that was the first time my worlds like 110% collided. And if you asked me in that moment, and a little bit still today, I would have been like, heck no, I don't want that to happen again. I prefer my worlds to just be their own little worlds and kind of coexist together because it's too much. I couldn't serve my client and feel like I was giving them my all and have my child in the room or in the area because she was a baby and wanted mom, not the stranger, rightfully so. And so I tend to lean towards keeping them very separate. And that's why I'm so excited for today's topic because I would not be able to function if I didn't have the element of time management skills and assets as well as setting boundaries. And I think that boundaries and time management, along with processes, all kind of feed into each other for the success of individuals. So, to answer your question more blatantly, I don't like my worlds to collide. I do share certain networks. And again, the way that I kind of see it is like if you had three circles, there's shaded area where they overlap, but none of them fully overlap because there's just no way I could function that way. So that's where the topic of boundaries come in and just like the importance of them and what role they play for the success of my business and my livelihood.
Yeah, and I feel like as entrepreneurs, it's so easy to either not set boundaries or set them and then steamroll right over them ourselves or let other
Mhm.
people steamroll over them. So, how do you recommend business owners go through the process of figuring out what those boundaries are and actually setting them for themselves?
Yeah, great question. So, first, let's talk a little bit about what are boundaries. Boundaries are the limits that you set to protect your time, energy, and focus. In business, they really ensure that you prioritize tasks that align with your goals and avoid different distractions that really don't serve your long term objectives. We've heard the term of like working in your business versus working on your business. That's kind of where I think boundaries come into play. For someone who's multi-passionate like me with an entrepreneur and all these other things, boundaries really help you manage your diverse interests without spreading yourself too thin. So for me, we talked about everything that I do, but your pillars might be different. Like maybe it's being a fur mom and also running the business and having a podcast. And then also like wellness might be it or gardening, whatever your pillars are, really learning what those are and then how boundaries can help them. So, like an example is if you're passionate about photography, but you also run a consulting business, setting boundaries might mean dedicating certain days to certain things. So, if you're doing photography, maybe that's Mondays and Wednesdays, and then the consulting firm is more on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That way, you have time for it. But as those consulting emails come in on a photo day, you can be like, nope, I know I'm gonna get to those tomorrow, and it gives you a firm way of, like you said, not steamrolling your own boundaries, but actually saying, "Nope, I can't do that today, but I know I have it slated for tomorrow."
Yeah, and I think even if you aren't a multi-passionate entrepreneur like some of us are, I think that it's still great advice for even within your business, right? Like I have implemented specific days that I do interviews and meetings and things like that. It's usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But I also understand sometimes that doesn't always, align with other people's businesses. So like
Mhm,
today we're it's a Monday and you came to me after you saw my scheduler and said, "Hey, I can't do Tuesdays or Thursdays for XYZ reason. Can we do Monday?" And I was able to accommodate you. But that was a choice that I made as
mhm,
opposed to just having my schedule wide open and letting people
mhm,
schedule whenever. So I think there's a balance there of deciding what is really a non negotiable for you. Like, I don't mind having meetings on a separate day. I was actually able to schedule another interview right after yours for someone who also couldn't do Tuesdays and Thursdays. So it worked out. So I think there's a difference between not having them or having them, but letting other people steamroll over them, and
mhm.
then making a conscious choice to say, I know that usually it only is on XYZ day, but this week it's going to also be on this day because of extenuating circumstances. So how do you recommend entrepreneurs balance those things? And, we talked about how they understand what boundaries actually are, but how do they actually implement it in their lives and then balance them when weird things come up that they have to adjust to?
Yeah, great question, and I think what we can do is everyone's in their own chapter. So for you, you might not be multi-passionate to the same level that I am, but you still do marketing, you still do interviews, you still have in person. So whatever you're labeling it as, the listener can kind of negotiate what that looks like for them. One thing I wanna mention briefly before we dive into how they can do it is the why. Like, if you're like, "Well, I think I'm doing okay, like, maybe I don't need boundaries," a couple quick things for that would be if you're lacking luster around your business, but you've always loved your business and you're like, "Why am I feeling overtaken by it or maybe burned out or just, like, unsteady in your step," that could be a reason that you should kind of consider implementing some boundaries, even if you don't necessarily tangibly feel oh, I need to set boundaries or there's something wrong with my scheduling, because those can eat away at you different things. Also, if you have, not that I'm a doctor or anything, but like insomnia can also be a role that would encourage you to set boundaries because your brain's not able to go to sleep at night. That's another one. At least I experience that if I'm too much in the weeds, like my brain will be like, "Oh, you forgot to this. Oh, you forgot to this," and I can't turn it off at night. But with boundaries, it enables me to be able to do that and be more intentional with my time, and just that mental overload and also life imbalance. If any of those things sound like something you even have a tinge of, then it's important to start looking at the boundaries. So, to your question, what do boundaries in business look like? It depends a little bit on yourself. So, like you, Lauren, like you said, you do your interviews Tuesday, Thursdays. I do mine on Mondays, and mine in the gentlest of ways is less of a choice. I work full time, so I have to take a PTO day. So I take 1 to 2 PTO days a month so that I can just focus on recording and doing these sort of ventures, which is super fun, but it does limit me a little bit more. And for me, that's a non-negotiable because I don't really have a space at work to be able to shut away and go do a recording. So for me, I start out by putting those non-negotiables in the calendar straight away. So at the beginning of each month through November, I have my calendar set up for my podcast interviews and when I'm available for that. And again, those kind of go back to non-negotiables because a lot of different elements go into it. But then on the flip side, I can take other phone meetings or any other consultations other times. So I have more flexibility in that. So to your point, it kind of goes back to what flexibility do you have? You were very kind in being flexible to honor today because you had the ability and you made a choice to do it, not because you were throwing everything at the wall and scrounging for that last little bit. It was very intentional. And I think that's the differential here. So, with that, the first thing I suggest for anyone, if they don't already have it, is creating a mission statement and values for their business. And while that's a huge 30,000-foot view, I think it's so important because that's what you're going to come back to on those days when you have to say no to somebody or when you have to reallocate your time because it doesn't fit for that day. And when I say doing that, it's hugely important to have those mission statement and values written from a good place or a neutral place. You don't want to write those as a defense. You don't want them to sound aggressive. You just want them to be organic, what you're trying to do for your business. Because then on a day when a client pushes you and is like, well, I really need Saturday availability. And then you feel like a rotten egg for saying, no, I'm not going to give it up because this is my boundary, gosh darn it. Then you can revert back to your mission and your values and see how it aligns, if it makes sense to make the exception, or if it's not serving you to make that exception. And so that would be my first main tangible thing. Make sure you have a mission statement and your values. Something tangible for that is, and for me, prioritizing weekends for my family is a huge rule in my book that I need to maintain. And it's taken years to get there. But now we try to keep Sundays, especially during football season, because it works with my family, because my husband loves football, clear. And if a client asks me for something on a Sunday, whether that's a photo shoot or whatever, I have flexibility. It's not like I'm doing anything life or death related. But if I'm going to make that exception, like let's say booking a wedding versus a portrait session, well, it's 8 hours, it's way more money, and they don't have the flexibility of changing their date. If it's a portrait session, I mean, well, let's explore Saturday and a different date weekend before we dive to me letting get down my guard and putting my boundaries aside and kind of having that dialogue.
You can't go to a bride and say, "I'm sorry, I'm not available Sundays. Can you just move your whole wedding for me?"
Like, how much do you really want me to photograph your wedding?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really great, so you should obviously just move everything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
So right? Yeah, just let me know how that goes. So I love what you were saying about sort of figuring out what works for you because I feel like boundaries are so personal. They're so,
Mhm.
like I don't have children. I don't have anyone else living in my home. I don't even have a fur baby right now. So like I can be really flexible with when I'm working and what I'm doing. However, I don't like working past 4 and I don't like working before 10 and if those are the ways that I work and those are the ways that my mind and body works then that's what I can do. That's why we get to be entrepreneurs. And I was having this
Mhm.
conversation with a friend yesterday over some sushi lunch. And she was talking about, she's at a job and she's thinking about quitting and she doesn't really love it. And she's like, I want to just be able to wake up in the morning and like go for a run and then meditate and then, kind of start my morning slow. And I was like, that's what I do. I don't go for a run. But that's what I do in the morning because I have that flexibility and I have built that into my business. I wake up, I walk on the treadmill or walk outside for a little while and then I do some stretching and then I, slowly make breakfast. And my first appointments are never before 10 a.m. because I know that I need that flexibility and I know that my mind does not work before 10
Mhm.
a.m. And then I also stop working at like 3 or 4 because I get tired and doing things like these interviews is a lot of mental energy. And so I
Mhm.
have to really honor the fact that my body gets tired, my mind gets tired. I start stumbling over words, and not that I wasn't already doing that this morning, but it gets worse as the afternoon goes on. And so I have to really understand, like, no, you're gonna be tired. Don't plan things after 4 o'clock at night. So I think it's really important that we understand how we work, what our own personal preferences are, what our boundaries are. And I also love the way that you talked about the mission and vision because that's always how I start my clients. We always start with when I work with a client one on one, what do you want your business to look like? What is important to you? What are the values
Mhm.
that you want to uphold in your business? Because it is the basis of so many things. It's a basis on how you spend your time, like you were saying, how you agree to do things. You decide whether or not things actually fit in your business. And
Mhm.
it helps sort of guide how you set up your business and where you want your business to go. So I think it's so important to have that foundation. And so many people skip over that step and don't ever create those things because they don't really see the value in it. What are some other ways that you can recommend business owners sort of set them up for success when it comes to boundaries, other than creating their mission and vision and sort of understanding how their home life fits in? Like, what are some other things that they can do to figure out what their boundaries should be?
Yeah, great question. And you hit on a lot there, and I love it. And full transparency, sometimes I think you're in a quote unquote worse boat than me because if I call somebody and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, my daughter has the flu," they're like, "Oh, okay, okay, okay." But if you call and like, "Hey, I just don't want to talk to you today," they're like, "Oh." So like sometimes having those outside factors are actually in some ways, and I don't think that they're comparable per se, but, like, you have to be true to yourself, Lauren. I have to be true to other people. So, like, if I'm looking my husband in the eye and, like, I booked too much and stuff, that's an outside factor bringing me back to reality. Whereas for you, you're like, "Ah, well," and not that you experience this, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs do. "Well, I have the time, so I guess I have to. Like, I guess I should. Like, why
Mhm.
would I say no after 4 PM if that's all they have available?" Or whatever the case is. And I've been there. I've been there both in my external job and my career and also internally with myself. And it's interesting to navigate the guilt of either because I think as entrepreneurs, even being having all these other things on my plate and living with 2 dogs, a fish, a child, and my husband, and right now my sister's staying with us, so we have kind of a lot going on there. I have to make time for myself too. And so I think it can be hard even if you don't have the built-in quote unquote excuses or external factors to honor yourself. And so a lot of the tips that I want to share with you guys today, you Lauren, but your listeners speak to that too. Like setting office hours. Yeah, sure. You could work until 5 PM or 6 PM. You don't have a different commitment, but you got to set that because you have to honor yourself. Think about how you would treat someone who is employed by you or that has employed you, you would treat them respectfully, you would honor those guidelines. And so setting those things in place, which we can dive into, you have to honor them as if you're an external factor. So one of the big ones for me is setting office hours and learning to set expectations. So you talk with your clients about the vision and the mission and the values and all those things. That's a part of the expectations that they're building for themselves and how you can help guide them and help build them upward from there. So for me, it's office hours. I tend to not do stuff past 4 PM either. And if I do, I schedule them to be sent the next day during office hours. That way, my clients are not getting in the habit of, oh, we have unlimited access to Katie all day, every day. Because I have been in a boat where people are texting me and messaging me all the time and they want a rapid response. And honestly, that's my fault because I was giving it to them. And even in my day job, it's kind of funny, but I've gotten to the point now that my office hours are in my signature. It says 8 to 4 PM. And I often say past 4, but my GM He's a GM in a private organization. We have 7,000 members, 600 employees. He, to the smallest bit, that if it's after 4, if someone's at my desk or in my office or talking to me, he'll be like, "Oh, leave Katie alone. She doesn't function at this time." And it's funny because it's just a joke, but then usually that sparks the other person to be like, "Oh, do you want me to come back tomorrow? Are you leaving soon?" And I can say, "No, no, no, I'm good. Let's push through it." Or I can be like, "Yeah, he's actually not kidding. I usually lose my marbles and can't find my words, just like you, Lauren, after 4 PM." And so even that small conditioning has helped me to honor the boundary. That goes a little bit into a thing that I wanna get into a little bit later is communication. But again, I would say setting office hours and being true to them because I believe that everyone will take advantage of whatever they're able to with no ill intention. So if you're responding at midnight and they respond at midnight and you respond again, they're gonna keep going. They're not gonna draw that boundary for you. So I think time is a huge one when you decide you're gonna do what. And the tangibles of this for me is when my daughter has gymnastics, I put that in the calendar first. I put all my non-negotiables in the calendar first. So those PTO days when I know I can record, my daughter's commitments, the days that we have after school activities or back to school celebrations or whatever. And then the second one is my husband's non-negotiables because I watch the kid when he needs me to. And so putting those in your calendar and just setting yourself up for success in that way, and then let the others trickle in. And then you have the flexibility to say, yeah, I can take one more thing on this Monday, or no, I can't. And for me, the visual of having everything in my calendar, including self care days, I will literally block off time. I think we may have touched on this either on or offline when we talked on my podcast, but like I batch all my content. So I'll go hard for a couple of weeks, knowing that at the end of those couple of weeks, I've blocked the whole week and I can just paint in the evenings or relax or watch a movie because I've set those boundaries, knowing that we're going to hustle hard this week and this week we're going to chill for a little bit. Does that kind of give answer your question and give some tangibles of how people can navigate the boundaries?
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I do want to add that you didn't mention with your office hours is you actually have an email autoresponder that I've been considering implementing as well, where when someone sends you an email, you auto respond and say, "Here are my office hours. Here's when you can expect a response. Thanks so much." And you don't really give people another option. Like there's probably no like I like to compare it in my podcast all the time. I'm always talking about brain surgery because I've had brain surgery. There's nobody waiting for their brain surgery, like, there's no fires, like, it's very unlikely that there's gonna be a true emergency in your business, so you're
Mm.
setting the appropriate, boundaries and expectations for people about when they can expect a response and all of those things, so I think that's something that people should really consider as well, and I've been considering implementing also, is an autoresponder so that people know when to expect responses from you. What inspired you to add that? Like, where did that idea come from? Or, maybe we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm just curious where that idea came from.
No, it actually came from setting boundaries years ago, though. So I tend to, in the photography realm, book clients for one main reason. Now, give me grace that I'm a good photographer, I'm a business-minded person, blah, 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 all that jazz. I respond really freaking quick. And before I had a child, I would respond to their inquiries within 60 minutes, almost 100% of the time. And I can tell you that that weeded out so many other photographers because you as a client, if you're like, "Hey, Katie, I want to book with you. I want to book next month, blah, blah, blah," or a wedding down the road, I'm in their inbox setting up a consultation before the other person's even opened the email. And I took great pride in that. And I still sort of some days do. But then I realized that that was a pivotal moment that what if I'm not responding within that time frame? What if the competition like is crossing the line at the same time as I am? Where does that put me? And so I started to realize like I didn't want to always be that way. Specifically, I had a client for this large magazine publication that reached out. Actually, I thought it was a scam at first or like something gimmicky. And I remember I was at the park with my husband. I had planned this whole photo shoot for our anniversary. And we were there and I was like, it stressed me out not to respond because I knew I was so good at responding so quickly. And so I was like, well, I just can't leave them hanging, but it would be weird to just be like, hey, I see this. I'll get back to you. So I like got all stressed out. So in that moment is when I was like, okay, let's do an autoresponder, which I personally do not enjoy getting them because I feel like they just take up space. But it's been hugely impactful because it gives expectations straight out the gate. And one reason I didn't actually bring that up is because that goes into the communication piece of boundaries. It's one thing to just have boundaries set up, but we have to communicate them. So now people are seeing my autoresponder and being like, okay, okay, she knows I exist. I think it's 48 hours for business people, it's 24 hours for new clients, and 72 hours for like industry people. That's what I say when I'll respond. And it's really helped because then they don't chime in again, they don't check in again until that time has lapsed. And so it gives me peace of mind knowing I've made contact. They know I'm still an active business. I'm still alive and well, but it communicates to them that give me a little bit of time and we'll get back to you. So that's what sparked that. And also in my day job, I have my hours of operation in my signature line because I tend to respond earlier in the morning because that's when I'm most productive. And then I get pulled into like employee discussions or just, disciplinary or different things that take me away from my basically admin time later in the day. So I put that in the signature line, and that's also been really helpful to navigate what times I work and when people can expect a response. And again, that communication element of it, I think is so big because we could sit here and have 10 of your listeners say, these are what I do for boundaries, but it's not working. But where are you communicating them? Where are you letting the client know that this is the expectation? And again, they'll take advantage of whatever they can because that's just who we are and what we do. Of course, like if you're giving away free cookies, most people will take them over a paid cookie because it's there, it's an opportunity, right? Although I'll pay for cookies 'cause I like cookies. But
Now I want
you
a
get the
cookie.
right? Nice warm cookie with a glass of milk.
Mhm.
But you get the gist of it, and the idea there is it really goes into the communication, and so that's why I have that autoresponder. That's why it's in my email signature, just making sure that you're communicating those things, and also, the other thing with communication, I think a lot of it is about the narrative. People don't necessarily need an explanation, and I don't think a lot of people necessarily want an explanation. So, what I mean by that is I don't say when I said that I couldn't do a Tuesday or Thursday, I'm not like, "Oh, hey, Lauren, I work full time and Tuesdays are actually the day that I have team meetings and blah, 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 blah. So it's a lot harder to take PTO. And Thursdays I tend to do as my interview days at my day job, blah, 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 blah." I just said, "Hey, those 2 don't necessarily work for me. Do you have any flexibility?" You don't care to hear the excuse. So I was still able to honor my boundary while not necessarily steamrolling your boundary, but giving you an opportunity to say, yeah, I'll be workable, or no, I can't be workable on that. And neither of us threw out all these excuses and explanations. We just mutually honored that, and I think most people will. So
Yeah.
again, it's about that narrative. Don't dive into the communication piece. Like my autoresponder doesn't say, "I'm not getting back to you because I actually work full time and I have a toddler and I'm doing podcast recording." It just says, "Hey, these are the general outlines." Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I think another key part of that too is you don't owe anyone an explanation. Like, not only are you not offering it, but they don't deserve it for any reason. Like, people, I think especially women, feel like we have to justify our decisions and we have
Mhm.
to justify our boundaries a lot because we weren't always encouraged to make them when we were younger. And I feel like we have this mindset of, I have to explain to them why because I owe them an explanation, and we don't. We don't owe anyone anything,
Mm-mm.
especially as a business owner. You do not owe anyone an explanation for any of the reasons that you have boundaries and what, the circumstances are behind the boundaries. Like, you do not owe anyone an explanation for any of that.
Not at all. And I think that people don't always care to hear them anyways. And, for me, I have had returning clients. Like I have 2 very, very specific, but honestly, like 4 returning clients for fall photos this year. They've come to me for years and years. And I give them a little bit more of an explanation, but honestly, I find that they don't even care either. Like I'm slower than I've ever been at responding, but they also know that I have a kid because they see me each year. So we talk about our kids growing and stuff. And it's honestly just like unloading your baggage on them when we don't owe it to them. So why would I open up my most intimate parts and like explain all that and be vulnerable when they're just like, "You could have just said you can't do Sunday and you can do Saturday. That's
Yeah.
fine."
I don't
I'm
need
like,
your life story.
yeah, exactly. But I find that so many people do that. And I'll admit my schedule, especially now that I've been doing more PR with podcasting like this, I do sometimes feel bad. I'm like, I have very limited opportunities. And so what I've started to do, which I don't think I did with you because that was kind of in the wave of figuring it out, and we'd already talked a couple times, so we had a little bit of rapport, is when I do pitch, I'll say, "I do have limited availability, so here's, like, the new usual days I'll do it on." So that way if they pick me, they're not like, "Oh, great, I was so excited to have you, but you're so limited on your availability that now whatever," and it just creates this weird thing, or they feel obligated to honor it.
Yeah.
So that's another communication piece for my own expectations and my own boundaries to say, "Hey, these are the days that I can do." Now, of course, if it's a podcast that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I absolutely wanna be on that," then you go back to the drawing board and say, "Well, I can be flexible." But the last thing I would say with communication is you have to just be honest with yourself about what you can handle and when you need to say no. And I've done a couple podcasts on just learning to say no because we're in such a yes culture and mindset as business owners and like you said as women that you have to be honest with yourself. And if it's not fueling your purpose or helping you in some way, it's okay to say no or to offer other things. And I tend to go about the narrative of like, kinda like you and I, like, "Hey, Lauren, I can't do Tuesday, Thursdays. Is there any chance that you can do Mondays?" Instead of just being like, "No, that doesn't work for me." And you can close the door if that's where you're at and you're honest with yourself and it doesn't serve you, that's fine. But you also don't have to say no as in it's a hard stop. It can be, "No, I can't do that right now, but I have flexibility down the road." Or, "Unfortunately, that doesn't fit my agenda this week, but we could do next week." Always pivoting and seeing what works and leaving that door open. I tended early on, back when I was a yes girl and responding to every inquiry within 60 minutes, I would close the door and almost burn bridges, not like super intentionally or like bluntly, but I would like close the door if something didn't work. Now I learned like it's cool if we don't vibe right now, like, maybe 6 months from now we will. Let's keep that door open. We don't need to be on bad terms. And so I think just being honest and authentic with yourself on what those boundaries need to look like for you are really, really important to navigate.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And you talked a lot about communication already. How would you recommend someone handle a person who is not respecting their boundaries? For example, you have a client who is demanding that you respond, really fast. You have, people who are steamrolling over your boundaries and you've maybe reiterated your boundaries to them. How do you recommend people sort of handle that situation? What are the things that they need to continue communicating? What are the steps that people should take to just reinforce those boundaries and deal with that situation?
Lauren, great question. I think there's 2 little runoffs that you could do. One is, are they intentionally or unintentionally doing it? Now, we had a client once who would, like, text us and email us at the weirdest hours, and it felt like they were demanding a response, and so I ended up calling her up and be like, "Let's have, like, a one-on-one video, whatever." And I talked to her about it, and she was like, "Just because I send it doesn't mean you have to respond." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Well, I'm in the mentality of you thought it was really important if you texted me at 9:30 at night, but okay, that's fair. I'm just trying to mimic you and be an extension of you, and if you think that that's a huge deal, I wanna think it's a huge deal and not, like, rain on your parade. But her intention was just it was in her mind in that moment. So I think that's the first one to see is where their intention lies, and obviously, as business owners, you can probably gauge that. And so guessing that your question airs towards the people who are intentionally doing it, who are like, "Okay, but I need it now." Well, 2 things. One is they're probably not your ideal client then, and that's where you have to learn to say no and be honest with yourself that, like, this isn't working. But I'm a big believer of trying first, and because I have HR in my background, also documenting it. So call them up, get a video chat, have that face-to-face humanitarian side of it. "Hey, Lauren, I know you really want these done by Fridays, but with the way that you approach the management style and your way that you're communicating, I'm a little bit struggling. These are the days that I've allocated," which was outlined in our contract. But I just want to reiterate, is this going to be workable and is this okay? And if they say no, that's okay. Like, give them the option to say no, that it doesn't work for them. Be like, "Okay, well, maybe we start looking at an exit strategy because this is where my business is at this point. Now, I do know some other consults or coaches or whatever, fill in the industry, they can help you with that." I do that a lot with photography, and it's actually been challenging. Very specifically, I had a client who was supposed to shoot with me on Labor Day, but he kept being really slow to respond, and then he just, like, would latch onto one little thing in my email. So he's like, "Yeah, we can do this at this time, at this location." And the zip code was correct, but the location was, like, 30 minutes further. It was, like, on the furthest spot. So I was like, "Well, that doesn't work." But I realized rather than arguing back and forth and figuring out with him, I finally said, we haven't signed the contract yet. I actually realized I'm pretty busy. I'm basically double booked that day. Here's 3 other people who can serve you. I personally asked them if they were able and willing, and then I put it on him. I said, "Here's these 3 people who will do this for you, and I think that they're gonna be able to fit your deadlines and your requirements." Funny thing is that I'm so glad I did that because he didn't respond to that email at all, nor has he responded to the other 3, and, like, the other 3 people, and I'm like, "How was I supposed to meet you in 4 days' time?" Like, I would've just shown up and been like, I don't do that, I have a contract and stuff, but there's no way if that's his communication style that he would've done
Yeah.
it. And so, basically, I'm a little bit hopeful he doesn't reach out again and kinda got the hint, but if he doesn't, I removed him from all my email lists, so he won't get my updates on my openings. And it's nothing personal per se, but for me, I'm type A. I can't function that way, and I thought that I put very clear parameters of the location, and it just seemed a little bit off that they took it on the furthest part of that radar screen to make it that. I don't know if that's articulated well, but basically, sometimes
Yeah.
you just have to decide, like, "Hey, we're not a good fit, and that's okay." And if you have the time and energy, give them a warm handoff, because at the end of the day, if he were to fire back to me, I'd be like, "Look, Joe Schmo, I explained to you that I needed it signed by these dates. It wasn't, and I gave you who I could. I'm sorry it didn't work out. And I've done what I can do." And at the end of the day, going back to the documenting it piece for my HR hat is send a recap in an email so you have it in writing so that if it ever comes to it in a contractual way, you are like, "Hey, I spelled this out." I've done the opposite. I have it in my contract for certain gigs that they have to respond within a certain time frame because I've had people who like to set it and forget it and then come back months later and want to, like, revisit, and I'm like, "No, your time's elapsed."
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I've done on the flip side. But I think sometimes we just have to have those hard conversations and say, "Hey, this doesn't work for me. If we can find a mutual ground where this works for both of us, awesome. If not, let's see what we can explore. Let me reach out to my network to see who I can put in front of you that would be a better fit." So again, you're not saying, "No, Lauren, you don't deserve this. I'm out." You're saying, "Hey, we're not jiving right now, and that's okay. Let me see how I can support you differently." And that just might mean signing off on the contract and being done with it and giving them people who can serve them. But I think it makes the blow a little bit softer if you still sound like you're willing to help and give them other resources.
Yeah, that's such great advice because so often when you're a new entrepreneur, you feel like you have to bend over backwards for every single client and you have to like make it work and you have to really struggle because it's, the money and you need the money. But I think when we take a step back and realize like this guy is a walking red flag and it's going to be more trouble than it's worth to work with him, that it allows you to bring in those customers that you want to work with when you're pushing
Mhm,
away the customers that you don't wanna work with. I was doing a follow-up discovery call with a potential client a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how she might be going through a divorce with her husband, and she had signed up for all these courses but haven't done any of them. And it was just a lot of red flags of like, this
mhm,
person's probably not a good fit for my program because I need people who are going to take action and who are invested and who are ready to go. And so I decided, like, hey, reach out to me when things are a little calmer, when you're really ready to move forward. But right now, like, I don't think we're a good fit. And I said it in a nicer way. Right now, I don't think we're a good fit.
mhm,
And then 2 days after that call, I had another discovery call and booked that client because she was perfect, and she was an ideal client, and she was excited, and she was ready to go. And then 2 days after that, booked another client. And I wouldn't have been able to take on all of those clients at once if I hadn't said no to that first
mhm,
red flag client. And so I think people need to think about not only is it about setting boundaries, it's also about leaving you open for the right people and making
mhm,
sure that you are staying true to what you want out of your business and what you want out of your life and implementing that because I think for business owners it can be really hard to have that backbone to go
mhm,
back and say you are trampling over my boundary right now and I don't appreciate it. And here's the situation and we shouldn't work together. That is such a hard skill for people to have. You in HR have to probably have that a lot. I've worked in HR before and I had to have that skill, so I understand. But, people who have never really had to stand up for themselves like that or have avoided standing up for themselves like that really struggle with developing that skill. So, how would you recommend that people develop that backbone, understand sort of where they should have that backbone? And I know I keep calling it a backbone, but it's also a boundary. How do people develop that ability to say no to the wrong clients and push back when someone, rolls over their boundaries?
I would say it's just practice because honestly, like, there are still times when I struggle with it. Like, there are still I've had some clients, like you're saying, that I was, like, red flagged, but I stuck with them. So I can think of one who's a current client, and they're wonderful, but we do not vibe on certain levels, and every single time I tell my husband, I'm like, why did I do this again?" But, number 1, numbers, she's brought in so much money for me, so it's fine, and again, because she pays my that certain package, that higher number amount, I can work with that. She's also super flexible. I've had to cancel on her twice and like we just reschedule and she's chill with it too. So you kind of figure out what works, but there's been a couple times when I've stood my ground and we still have a good relationship, so that's been interesting. And then also, like you're saying, like you don't want to say, "Okay, let me go and do this with this person." And then as you're doing it and you feel bitter already, you're turning away the good clients. And ultimately, too, think about your long game. What is your long game? For me, let's just say hypothetically, to some degree, I want to do wedding photos. So I booked this bride who I had so many red flags with. It wasn't super enjoyable. And then I go to her wedding and all her bridesmaids are getting married and they want to book me. Oh, wow, that looks like a great opportunity. If you can see me, I'm rolling my eyes and stuff to book more clients. But they're probably a lot like her. So now I've
Mhm.
went down this rabbit hole of all these clients and word of mouth referrals that don't serve me. And so now we're going to have an issue because the clients that I'm going to be getting from that client are going down this path when I should be going to the left. So that's another element to say, okay, this is where I need to draw the line because I don't want to grow in that direction. And so practicing it, I think starting out very small. And if you do need it for financial purposes, say, okay, yes, I can do this, but here, let me practice communicating my boundaries, knowing that they might get a little bit railroaded, but I'm going to practice because I'm not ballsy enough right now to say, hell no, Lauren, I can't work with you. So just practice small little things and then you'll start to learn and grow. I mean, I still have moments where I'm like, should I say this? Can I say this? And I'm like the head of HR at my job and like second in command, and we have tons of people and all these things. But I still sometimes have those moments when I'm like, should I say this? And that's okay. The other thing I would say is sometimes you can put it back on them too. So let's look at it from like a personal trainer perspective. If I'm a personal trainer and I have a client that I've had for X amount of years, but she only wants to do 30-minute sessions now instead of 60. And if I give her a 60-minute window because I can't book someone else, let's say on a Monday, I can say, "Hey, Lauren, I want to continue to best serve you, but the Monday session no longer works for your 30-minute allotment. So I can do Tuesdays or Thursdays at this time or this time. What works for you?" And you might be like, "Well, no, Mondays are my day to work out." Okay. Well, unfortunately, I don't have that. So unless we can make Tuesday, Thursday work, maybe we should explore a different direction. And then that person's going to say, well, Mondays don't work for me. So I'm going to have to go find somebody else. And you almost make the narrative back on them for them to make that hard decision because you're still giving them the pathway to do it. But if it doesn't work within your boundaries, then they have to make the decision to walk away. And sometimes that's really nice. I will even say, as small as podcast recordings, sometimes I'll book a Monday back to back to back and people will cancel and they'll be like, "Is it okay if I cancel?" Or like, "I have like a frog in my throat. I just don't know if I can do it today." And sometimes like, heck yes, because then that gives me a little bit of a break anyways. And if they get around to rescheduling it, awesome. If they don't, the ball's in their court. But I have this sense of relief versus me having to come in and being like, I'm going to drop 2 of these recordings today because I'm too overwhelmed. So sometimes putting it back on them works too. But ultimately, I would say just practice in small baby things. Add it to your signature line, the hours that you work, or add that automatic responder, or just outline it in your contract when you start or clear expectations at the beginning so that they know that this is coming and they're not surprised by it later. And that sets you up to have those small moments to practice. It's just like stretching, right? You got to stretch the muscles until they're ready and they'll be sore for a little bit. I did yard work yesterday and my forearms are killing me today, but I'm here for it because I'm going to do more yard work and we're going to work through the pain points. And then eventually, hopefully, my forearms are strong enough to be able to hoe the yard without me being in pain. But you just got to stretch those muscles.
Yeah, and that is such great advice too, practice. I don't like to say practice makes perfect because it never does, but practice makes better and practice gives you improvement. So, this has been such a great conversation, Katie. Thank you so much. If you could leave our listeners and viewers with one final piece of advice, whether it's reiterating something you already said or a new piece of advice, what would that be?
Consistency. I would say no matter what you're doing in business, whether it's, marketing or just building networking or working on boundaries, consistency is key. I think that's a one thing I'll always come back to. So practice those boundaries and try to be consistent with yourself and with your current clients because consistency is going to make huge impacts in any forum.
Yes, great advice and something we all need to be better at. I think personally, I need to be better at it. Well, thank you again so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking to you. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, for having me. I would say going to my website, www.katymurrayphotography.com. That's KATYMURRAY, photography.com. And you can find social media, you can find any of my offerings. And I do have a free resource for your listeners. It's a time management tool for time blocking. It's a template that they can pull from there, but I'll also shoot you the link if you want to put in the show notes. But yeah, that website's going to be the best. And if they want to link up on Instagram, they can find the little Instagram icon on my website or just look at GingerBiz, GingerBiz on Instagram and Threads.
All right, perfect. I will make sure I link all of that in the show notes and in the YouTube description. And thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. It's a great conversation. Always happy to chat with you.
Of course. And thank you all so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please give a rating and a review. It helps other people find this podcast and helps them help with their processes in their business. Thank you all so much, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.